I want to focus on two things in this week's Torah portion. The location of Midian, which is the key to where both the burning bush incident as well as the Mount Sinai encampment of the Israelites fleeing from Egypt happened. So even though the portion is from Exodus 1:1 to 6:1, we're going to begin our reading at chapter 3. Now, I'm also going to draw heavily from the extensive Torah class lessons on the book of Exodus, along with some modern findings about Moses' travels and living experience locations, as documented in the enormously detailed book by Glenn A. Fritz. It's called The Exodus Mysteries. So open your Bibles to Exodus. We're going to start reading at chapter 3. Chapter 3. Now Moshe was tending the sheep of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And leading the flock to the far side of the desert, he came to the mountain of God, to Horeb. And the angel of Adonai looked to him in a fire blazing from the middle of a bush. And he looked and saw that although the bush was flaming with fire, yet the bush was not being burned up. And Moshe said, I'm going to go over and see this amazing sight and find out why the bush isn't being burned up. And when Adonai saw that he had gone over to see, God called to him from the middle of the bush, Moshe, Moshe, he answered, here I am. And he said, don't come any closer. Take your sandals off your feet, because the place where you are standing is holy ground. I am the God of your father, he continued, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Yaakov. Moshe covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. And Adonai said, I have seen how my people are being oppressed in Egypt and heard their cry for release from their slave masters, because I know their pain. I have come down to rescue them from the Egyptians, to bring them up out of that country to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the place of the Canaanites, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizi, the Hivi, and the Yevusi. Yes, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have seen how terribly the Egyptians oppress them. Therefore now come, I will send you to Pharaoh, so that you can lead my people, the descendants of Israel, out of Egypt. Moshe said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? And he replied, I will surely be with you. Your sign that I have sent you will be that when you have led the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. And Moshe said to God, look, when I appear before the people of Israel and they say to me, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what's his name? What am I to tell them? And God said to Moshe, Eyeh asher yeh, I am what I am. And he added, here is what I say to the people of Israel. Say, I am has sent me to you. God said further to Moshe, say this to the people of Israel, Yud He Vav He, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Yaakov, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is how I am to be remembered from generation to generation. Go, gather the leaders of Israel together and say to them, Adonai, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, has appeared to me and said, I have been paying close attention to you. I have seen what is being done to you in Egypt, and I have said that I will lead you up out of the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, to a land flowing with milk and honey. They will heed what you say. Then you will come, you and the leaders of Israel, before the king of Egypt, and you will tell him, Adonai, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Now please, let us go 3 days' journey into the desert so that we can sacrifice to Adonai our God. I know that the king of Egypt will not let you leave unless he is forced to do so. But I will reach out my hand and strike Egypt with all my wonders that I will do there, and after that he'll let you go. Moreover, I will make the Egyptians so well disposed towards this people that when you go, you won't go empty-handed. Rather, all the women will ask their neighbors and house guests for silver and gold jewelry and clothing, with which you will dress your own sons and daughters, and in this way you will plunder the Egyptians. And Moshe replied, but I'm certain they won't believe me. They won't listen to what I say, because they'll say, Adonai did not appear to you. And Adonai answered him, what is that in your hand? He said, a staff. He said, throw it on the ground. He threw it on the ground. It turned into a snake. Moshe recoiled from it. Then Adonai said to Moshe, put your hand out and take it by the tail. He reached out with his hand, and he took hold of it and became a staff in his hand. This is so that they will believe that Adonai, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Yaakov, has appeared to you. Furthermore, Adonai said to him, now put your hand inside your coat. He put his hand in his coat, and when he took out, his hand was leprous, as white as snow. And then God said, now put your hand back in your coat. He put his hand back in his coat, and when he took it out, it was as healthy as the rest of his body. If they won't believe you or heed the evidence of the first sign, they will be convinced by the second. But if they aren't persuaded even by both these signs and still won't listen to what you say, then take some water from the river, pour it on the ground. The water you take from the river will turn to blood on the dry land. And Moses said to Adonai, O Adonai, I'm a terrible speaker. I always have been. I'm no better now, even after you've spoken to your servant. My words come so slowly. My tongue moves so slowly. Adonai answered him, who gives a person a mouth? Who makes a person dumb or deaf, keen-sighted or blind? Isn't it I, Adonai? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth, and I will teach you what to say. But he replied, please, Lord, send someone else. Anyone you want. At this, Adonai's anger blazed up against Moshe, and he said, don't you have a brother, Aharon the Levi? I know he's a good speaker. In fact, he is here now coming out to meet you, and he'll be happy to see you. You will speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and his teaching you both what to do. Thus, he will be your spokesman to the people, in effect. For you, he will be a mouth. For him, you will be like God. Now, take the staff in your hand because you need it to perform the signs. Moshe left. He returned to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, I beg you to let me go and return to my kinsmen in Egypt to see if they're still alive. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. And Adonai said to Moshe and Midian, go back to Egypt, because all the men who wanted to kill you are dead. So Moshe took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, started out for Egypt. Moshe took God's staff in his hand. And Adonai said to Moshe, when you get back to Egypt, make sure that you do before Pharaoh every one of the wonders I have enabled you to do. Nevertheless, I'm going to make him hard-hearted, and he'll refuse to let the people go. Then you are to tell Pharaoh, Adonai says, Israel is my firstborn son. I have told you to let my son go in order to worship me, but you have refused to let him go. Well, then I will kill your firstborn son. At a lodging place on the way, Adonai met Moses and would have killed him, had not Zipporah taken a flintstone and cut off the foreskin of her son. She threw it at his feet, saying, what a bloody bridegroom you are for me. But then God let Moses be, and she added a bloody bridegroom because of the circumcision. And Adonai said to Aharon, go into the desert to meet Moses. And he went and met him at the mountain of God and kissed him. And Moses told him everything Adonai had said in sending him, including all the signs he had ordered him to perform. And then Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the leaders of the people of Israel. Aharon said everything Adonai told Moshe, who then performed the signs for the people to see. The people believed, and when they heard that Adonai had remembered the people of Israel and seen how oppressed they were, they bowed their heads in worship. After that, Moshe and Aharon came and said to Pharaoh, "Here is what Adonai, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go, so they can celebrate a festival in the desert to honor me." But Pharaoh replied, "Who's Adonai that I should obey when he says to let Israel go? I don't know Adonai. I also won't let Israel go." And they said, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go 3 days' journey into the desert so that we can sacrifice to Adonai our God. Otherwise, he may strike us with a plague or with the sword." The king of Egypt answered them, "Moses and Aaron, what do you mean by taking the people away from their work? Get back to your labor." "Look," Pharaoh added, "the population of the land has grown, yet you are trying to have them stop working." That same day, Pharaoh ordered the slave masters and the people's foremen, "You're no longer to provide straw for the bricks the people are making as you did before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. But you will require them to produce the same quantity of bricks as before. Don't reduce it, because they're just lazing around. This is why they're crying, 'Let us go and sacrifice to our God.' Give these people harder work to do. That'll keep them too busy to pay attention to speeches full of lies." Well, the people's slave masters went out, their foremen too, and said to the people, "Here's what Pharaoh says. I will no longer give you straw. You go yourselves and get straw wherever you can find it, but your output is not to be reduced." So the people were dispersed throughout all the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. The slave masters kept pressing them. "Keep working, make your daily quota, just as when straw was provided." The foremen of the people of Israel, whom Pharaoh's slave masters had appointed to be over them, were flogged and asked, "Why haven't you fulfilled your quota of bricks yesterday and today as you did formerly?" Then the foremen of the people of Israel came and complained to Pharaoh, "Why are you treating your servants this way? No straw is given to your servants, yet they keep telling us to make bricks. And now your servants are being flogged, but the fault lies with your own people." "Lazy," he retorted. "You're just lazy. That's why you say, 'Let us go and sacrifice to Adonai.' Get going now and get back to work. No straw is going to be given to you, and you will still deliver the full amount of bricks." And when they said, "You are not to reduce your daily production quota of bricks," the foremen of the people of Israel could see they were in deep trouble. Well, as they were leaving Pharaoh, they encountered Moshe and Aharon standing by the road, and they said to them, "May Adonai look at you and judge accordingly, because you have made us utterly aberrant in the view of Pharaoh and his servants, and you have put a sword in their hands to kill us." Moshe returned to Adonai and said, "Adonai, why have you treated the people so terribly? What's been the value of sending me? For ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has dealt terribly with this people, and you have not rescued your people at all." Adonai said to Moshe, "Now you will see what I'm going to do to Pharaoh. With a mighty hand, he will send them off with force. He'll drive them from the land." Verse 1 of chapter 3 explains that Moses had settled into the life of a shepherd in a remote place called Midian, but which is pronounced in more ancient times as Midian. Now, since there is no indication that Moses ever had any vocational training in being a shepherd before he fled to Midian, no doubt he received on-the-job training from his wife, Zipporah, and her sisters over a period of a number of years after he arrived in Midian. Now, interestingly, Moses apparently did not own animals of his own, but rather merely married into the valuable flocks that his father-in-law owned. And unlike the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it doesn't appear that Moses owned or had any personal wealth. Now, we read of him moving the flock to another pasture at a place identified as Mount Horeb. You know, sheep were constantly moving as they consumed the available vegetation until it was gone. And it is important to ascertain the best we can just where this flock was moved to because it was there that Moses had the burning bush experience and several years later would receive the Torah from God with 3 million tired Israelites in tow. In other words, wherever it was that he moved those sheep to was where the mountain of God was located. But it's also important to understand that flocks were not moved just because the shepherd got bored with where they were, nor were they moved any farther than absolutely necessary. They were moved as short a distance as possible to known and established places because water was critical. Sheep are delicate, and each animal was quite valuable. Now, using Glenn Fritz's data, which comports well with far older data going back even to the time of the earliest church fathers, let's establish just where Midian is. It's on the Arabian Peninsula, with its western border being the Gulf of Aqaba, which is itself a finger of the Red Sea. Now, I did some research on the location of ancient Midian, and nowhere that I could find, not a textbook, not a map, not any reference book from any source, could I find anything that put the region of Midian anywhere except on the Arabian Peninsula. Only does it exist in the Sinai in strictly Christian theological literature. And since Mount Sinai had to be either arising directly on Midian or bumping up against it in order to match with the biblical account, then the locations of Midian and Mount Sinai must be spoken of as being dependent on one another. In other words, they're coupled together. In 1834, after extensive research on the ground in that region, the explorer and scholar Charles Becky wrote, "It is evident that Mount Sinai cannot by any possibility be situated within the peninsula of Mount Tor, for where it has for ages been placed, where a mountain has been gratuitously chosen as the object in that character of the veneration of pilgrims and of the curiosity of travelers." See, the peninsula of Mount Tor was an old name for part of the Sinai Peninsula. Alan Kirkeslager, in his extensive research project concerned primarily with the location of Midian, concluded this: the persistence with which the Bible atlases and standard reference works continue to favor a location in the southern Sinai Peninsula merely testifies to the inertia of one stream of scholarly tradition. There is not a single piece of evidence that any Jew in the pre-Christian period, meaning prior to Constantine, ever located Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula. So despite the nearly impenetrable Christian belief that St. Catherine's Monastery, sitting on a hill in the Sinai where hundreds of thousands of Christians visit, marks the spot where Moses received the law, no one prior to Constantine's family arbitrarily designated this place as it had ever thought that that was the spot. To begin, it flies in the face of logic and simple geography. See, the reality is that in the days of Moses, Sinai at almost all times was Egyptian territory. Okay, which is why Moses fled through the Sinai as fast as it was humanly possible, then across a finger of the Red Sea called the Gulf of Aqaba, and then on to Midian. He was not about to flee Pharaoh and then remain in Egyptian territory near Egyptian military outposts where he could have been easily apprehended. Many archaeological finds have confirmed the unique Midianite culture, several Midianite towns and villages. Everything of Midianite origin ever found was discovered only on the Arabian Peninsula. There is not one shred of historical evidence that Midianites ever inhabited or even roamed about the Sinai. Now, it's fairly obvious that the people who argue that Midian spilled over into the Sinai Peninsula have an agenda. Okay, an agenda to prove that it was into the Sinai where Moses drove his sheep. And this is for no other reason than trying to defend the Christian Mount Sinai tradition as factually correct. Yet, some of the earliest church fathers well knew where Midian was. Origen, in the 3rd century, right around the time the New Testament was first created and canonized, confirmed the tradition of locating the city of Midian, in northwestern Arabia to the east of the Red Sea. Eusebius, a church father of the 4th century, said that it lies beyond Arabia to the south in the desert of the Saracens, east of the Red Sea. Even when excluding this recorded ancient evidence, it gets all the more unlikely that Moses drove his sheep to a mountain on the tip of the Sinai Peninsula, because it would have required him to drive his sheep some 50 or more miles northward along the eastern shore of the Gulf of Aqaba, then do a U-turn and drive those sheep another 75 miles or more down the other side of the Gulf of Aqaba to get to the site that has been designated as the place of the receiving of the law, Mount Sinai. Not only that, this route would have taken Moses and his flocks through barren desert with little or no pasture and even fewer available watering holes. No shepherd in his right mind would drive sheep which weren't his and are very delicate creatures through 125 miles of parched land just to move them to new grazing lands when none could have existed in that era. Well, in verse 2, we do see that wherever it was that they went to where there were mountains that rimmed the desert wilderness. It wouldn't have been very far, probably no more than 10 to 20 miles at the most. Now, just notice from today's reading, where Moses had the burning bush experience was in Midian, on the east side of the Gulf of Aqaba on the Arabian Peninsula, not in the Sinai Desert, and was the same place where God told him to bring the people when they fled Egypt. Now, I address this matter of the locations of Midian and Mount Sinai and the burning bush not only because it increases our biblical knowledge, but it also discredits yet another man-made tradition wrought by the Constantinian Church. It doesn't take too much effort to search for the truth in order for us to find out just how much the modern Christian faith bears little resemblance to the faith that Christ taught his disciples. And even more, how much the Christian faith actually rejects much of what Christ and his disciples taught and replaces it with doctrines. Now, I've commented before on the difference between belief and truth, and between belief and trust. Belief asks for nothing more than agreement with whatever a person chooses to believe. Evidence is not necessary to have a belief. And evidence that positively disproves that firmly held belief is rejected. I'll say it this way. Belief does not involve a search for truth. It involves a search for the validation of others. The search for truth demands evidence. It demands that when the principles of truth are found and followed, that the promises occur. The results occur. If the evidence is not there, if the outcomes don't happen as promised, It's not the truth. And the search must continue. And something as simple as the historical locations of Midian and Mount Sinai are either based on truth or on belief. There's either evidence or there is not. So you can trust what I showed you today because the evidence is there. And that is exactly how we need to go about testing every element of our faith. Because God invites us to. Test me, he says. Our faith is a logical and rational faith, not something based on myth and legend. In chapter 3 of our Torah portion, there's a long and detailed description of the special historical event when Moses' curiosity drew him to find out why a burning bush was not consumed by the fire. Suddenly, as he got nearer to it, he heard God call out to him. God presented himself as the God of his fathers and of the patriarchs. He informed him that Moses was about to be sent on a mission to free the children of Israel from slavery in Egypt and bring them to the land that long ago God had promised to Abraham. Turns out that God imposed on Moses a major role in the task of liberating the enslaved Israelites. Exodus 3:10, therefore now come, I'll send you to Pharaoh so that you can lead my people, the descendants of Israel, out of Egypt. In a very interesting and human way, Moses refused to accept his calling 5 times. And each time he was asked, he made another excuse to explain why he's not the right person for the task. This might be one of the biggest failings believers face. We know God's calling us to a task, but we refuse. I have learned a very important principle about our relationship with God. If you truly want to be used by Him, say yes to whatever God calls you to do. The truth is, many of us, we know deep down inside God is calling us to something, but we just don't want to do it. So we blow it off. Don't be so sure you're going to get another chance. I imagine Moses had some serious reservations about all of this. On the one hand, Moses had great empathy for the people of Israel, so much so that he risked his life and reputation just to help one of them. If he could, I'm sure he would have been happy to continue to help in the way that he had. However, at the same time, he had to flee Egypt under the threat of being executed. Now he has a wife, he has a vocation, he has a new life. Moses' excuses are as follows. First, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Second, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what's his name? What shall I tell them? Third, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and they say, the Lord didn't appear to you? Fourth, pardon your servant, Lord, I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you've spoken to your servant. I'm so slow of speech and tongue. Fifth, pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else. Perhaps we can categorize the fifth one as less as an excuse and more as his summation to why he's telling God no thanks. Now pay attention, because this is where it gets real. Do you want to know how God reacts when he comes to you, when he gives you a mission and you refuse it? Exodus 4:14. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses. See, this is a part of God's nature that we generally don't much like. Certainly we don't want to deal with it. We prefer the naive Christian image of our friendly Jesus who just wants what we want. Or God is a kindly grandfather who winks and smiles at our disobedience. We want to be able to say to one another or to God in prayer, "Oh, I want my life to matter. I want to serve him." But what we really mean is only if what he wants of us suits us. And when it doesn't, well, we just offer a lame excuse, then move on our lives uninterrupted. I guarantee you there are people sitting here or others listening to me who know they are being or have been tasked by God for a mission, but you just don't want to do it for whatever your reason. Just know that there will be spiritual repercussions. My strongest advice, step up to the plate. See, the ironic part is, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable it might seem now, the reward will overwhelm your fears and insecurities. God asked Moses to take upon himself a most important task with a long-term, faithful consequence: to save an entire people from slavery, to bring the Israelites out from the mighty Egyptian empire. Now, in order to succeed in this, Moses will not only have to convince Pharaoh to release these people who basically represent the bulk of Egypt's skilled workforce, who had worked there for hundreds of years, but Moses also had to convince the Israelites that they're able to go out to freedom. See, from a human perspective, this seems somewhere between insane and suicidal. Therefore, Moses' first 4 responses were quite understandable, and it seems that God well tolerated them. To convince the people of Israel, Moses had to know the answers to questions 2 and 3. To convince the Pharaoh, Moses had to drop the insecurities he had about his abilities and talents, and for this came questions 1 and 4. Graciously, lovingly, God provided him with answers that were the tools needed for the task. In response to God, Moses' conclusion was, find somebody else. Now God turned angry. See, God's anger is partly due to Moses saying that the task of bringing the children of Israel into the promised land isn't possible. So it's better not to try at all. There's a saying from the Parashah vote that is most appropriate here, by the way. Parashah vote's essentially a compilation of ethical teachings and sayings made by the rabbis. And it says this: it's not your responsibility to finish the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. See, what this saying so wisely teaches us is that when there is an opportunity, when there is a call from God to get up and do something, it is permissible to ask whether we have the proper tools to carry out that task. If God says we do, then our only response ought to be to do as much as possible to the greatest of our efforts and abilities and not to resist the call. See, this is a good way to think of our place as followers and worshipers of the God of Israel. We are all workers of God. And it is our primary directive to build up the community of believers in the kingdom. Yeshua even asked us to pray for more workers. Because the time's short, the work's great. As it says in Matthew chapter 9, then he said to his disciples, "Oh, the harvest is plentiful, but their workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." As the old proverb says, how do we eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Still, until we take that first bite, there is no way to eventually devour that elephant. See, we have to set aside our fears, our own wants, and our discomforts. Put them on a shelf and get started. Sometimes all we're asked to do is to get the ball rolling. God has tasked another to finish the job. See, we call ourselves here seed of Abraham. But a seed that sits in a grain sack is of no use. We have to be planted. We have to grow and produce fruit. Our salvation is not an end unto itself. It's the needed preparation to serve God and do more than we ever could have imagined.
For more teaching and information, visit us online today. Come and be a part of our fellowship. Here at The Seed, enjoy worshiping and learning God's Word with us.